All right. Okay, cool. So now we are live. I'm still waiting for Animist to connect. I don't want to post the link in the chat because last time I posted it in the chat, random people popped in and yelled something before they got kicked. Yell whatever they can before they get kicked, like "Hi, mom" or whatever, or boobs or penis or whatever seems amusing to them, probably some kind of a body part or some kind of sexual insult. Sexual stuff is always so exciting for little teenagers to scream on the internet. I don't know, I don't think it's all that exciting, but hey, who am I to say, who am I to judge some little 12-year-old pimple-nosed brat who lives in his mother's basement? Hey, Comedic, how's it going, Zabora? And we got Electric Star Pineapple. How's it going, Electric Star? Good to see you again. Glad you're here. Just waiting for Animus to connect, and I'm gonna try. I'm really gonna try to stay on topic. Not gonna go all political. Let me see. That link on Twitter just sends me back to this YouTube feed rather than the Google Hangout screen. Let me try it again. This link, it should work, okay? I'm gonna send it to you once more time, okay? Let me see. Paste. Try that link one more time, Animist, and then if it doesn't work, just let me know. And it should give you an option of, well, yeah, you've done it before. But yeah, let me know if it doesn't work for you, Animist. So anyhow, so I am going to try to not get. I'm gonna try and not talk about all the crazy shit that's going on in the world right now, and we're gonna focus in on just a certain topic in uh, in the metaphysical, shamanistic, witchcraft, Wicca, occult field. So So while Animist is connecting, I guess I can talk about some stuff that's going on in the Gardnerian world. There's um, there's a tradition that goes back in Gardnerian, and this tradition is old, and it just kind of it worked. Okay, good, Animist, it worked. So anyhow, and often there are people who want to change the tradition, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with wanting to change tradition, but they want everyone else to change and conform to their will, basically. And people are hesitant. They don't want to do that. So they are encouraged to create their own tradition. So, but then anyhow, it's just one of those things where there's a traditional way of practicing, and people don't want to practice the old traditional way. They want to do their new thing, so they're encouraged to create a new practice. That's how we've gotten Alexandrian Wicca. That's how we've gotten Dianic Wicca. That's how we've gotten the fairy tradition. That's how we've gotten a lot of other various traditions that have branched off from Wicca. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you change something to a certain degree, it's no longer what it was. It's like evolution, We're no longer fish or birds, we're mammals. And there's a reason for that. It's because we've changed whatever. Anyhow, so that's going on in the Gardnerian world right now. So I feel a little detached from it. So hey, how's it going, Animist?
Oh, it's going good.
Good.
I think the process you were describing is both inevitable and ongoing,
Mm-hmm.
and always will.
Yeah.
One, one of my favorite quotes, and he was specifically talking about witches because it was in the Discworld novels, was Terry Pratchett. And at one point in one of his really funny, entertaining novels, he pointed out that the natural number of a witch's coven is one.
Mm-hmm.
And they may get together to do some work for some reason, for something from the outside that's, a threat to the whole land. But then after that, everybody pretty much goes back to their ways.
Okay.
When you're talking about practitioners,
Mm-hmm.
then everybody ends up customizing their practice in whatever way works best for them and the commission they have. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it only becomes a bad thing when people fail to understand that process. That maybe you have your coven work with your friends and where you do things that are common to you, but then you also have to have your own personal practice to deal with the things that you don't necessarily have in common. And I think an awful lot of misery happens because people can't separate those two ideas.
Yeah, I think people get a slight misconception about that, though. I still have my own personal practice. I think it's everyone does. You're in a coven, but it doesn't mean that somehow you lose your identity or you don't have your own personal practice anymore. That's a seriously flawed misnomer in that I think people just sort of naturally adapt. That's not at all the reality. So what happens is we don't come together for stuff that happens in the land that needs to be dealt with. We come together on the Sabbats, which are the four major fire festivals, and then the four lesser Sabbats, which is the two solstices and the two equinoxes. And you'll never ever hear me refer to any of those under their more recent names of Litha or Mabon or any of the other made up names. I still refer to them as the equinoxes and solstices. But anyhow, that's a separate note. And then we come together for the aspects. And then, of course, for initiations and elevations, which are separate. But those are the times that you come together as a coven group. And then sometimes there might be gatherings, like we might have a celebration of gardener's birthday or something like that, that then other covens will come together. So you'll have like multiple covens that come and gather together. But for the most part, it is to celebrate the Sabbats. And that's what we do. And then if there's some kind of a working that we want to do on an SBAT, then we might do that on an SBAT for a particular whatever it is. Or if we don't have anything that really speaks to any particular members, then maybe we'll just do readings or just get together and just chat. So it's not really that it's not like you join a coven and suddenly you lose your identity. That's that's not the way it is. Joining a coven is like joining a gym or joining a work or joining any other group. You're always going to have you're subject to human interaction, which includes drama, blah blah blah, whatever. So all of those things are there, but it's no different from joining any other group. And I think that's where a lot of people don't understand. Most of the criticism I hear, and I'm not saying that you were criticizing it at all. This is actually something that I've heard from other people. They seem to criticize, but they've never been in a coven. You know what I mean? So they don't have the experience of one.
Yeah. See, like in my case,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of a occasional guest
Mm-hmm.
or a coven that's doing some kind of working. And this doesn't happen every year even, but occasionally there's witches that want a subwoofer. They want a earth practitioner in there for whatever reason, and so they invite the shaman in to play whatever circle guard or energy supply or something like that. So I don't get to see the sort of ongoing relationships over time. I just notice that they shift a lot. But I think from over the years, it seems like there's a certain consumerism attitude that people get where they want to do with, as a practitioner, what people get to do as a member of a church, as a congregation member, and they want to come in and sort of get the show, and then they're disenchanted when the show doesn't meet all of their needs.
Can I ask you a question? Why would a earth-based religion, which some witchcraft traditions and Wicca is, why would they need a quote unquote subwoofer, an earth-based person? Earth-centered.
Yeah, there are certain things where it seems to help. let me see if I can figure this out. Maybe they're doing a working, maybe trying to do a healing or like a spirit healing for someone, where some of it is a little bit outside the sort of bread and butter or the strong points of their practice. And so having someone else come in for whom that is their bread and butter and the strong point of their practice gives a little extra security or a little extra energy boost.
Would you mind expanding on that if you can?
Yeah, sure. Um, and I'm still coming to terms with this phrase that people are using in neo shaman, where they talk about soul retrieval, where you've got someone who's part of their person, their energy. I don't perceive it quite the way it seems to be used on the internet, but so they want to do something similar to a soul retrieval for someone they know, someone they want to heal or help, someone who's having some kind of spiritual problems, but their tradition is not ideally maximized for that particular work, and so they would have me in as a guest, for example, to help with that process and bring that specialty to that particular effort to help somebody. And that seems to work out really well, because that's something that my work is kind of maximized for helping with. And the responses I've gotten from situations like that are, wow, that felt safer, or that went easier than any time we've tried to do it before, or than we expected. It's kind of like bringing in a pinch hitter, something like that, because no tradition contains all magic. So sometimes as a group, if you bring in someone who's more specialized in a certain kind of thing, then that can make the general work easier.
Well, was this a one-time thing, or is this something that happens on multiple occasions?
This has happened over the years, variously, things like that. Sometimes a group is just interested in exploring the dynamics of it. Sometimes they want to do some serious, like geomantic energy work, and maybe no one in the group is that big up on geomantic energy work. But if you bring in someone who does that all the time, it sort of like sets a template, or it makes it easier.
So anyhow, yeah. So let's see. There was, I know last week we were talking about stuff, and you had mentioned a topic for discussion. And of course, I forgot what the topic was. Do you happen to remember what you were talking about last week about talking about this week?
Yeah. Well, we were talking basically about social consciousness last week. By the way, is my sound coming through okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. People in the chat, let us know if you can't hear him.
Okay. I just wonder, because I find that when I listen to the playbacks, my sound sounds better the farther I get the microphone from my mouth. It's got the headset I have has incredible gain on it. So it's like the first couple of weeks we were talking, I sounded like Darth Vader. Okay, apparently it's coming through. So we were talking about social consciousness last week. And so, near the end, we were like, well, what do you want to talk about? And I thought, well, we could talk about personal consciousness, where it comes from, what it does, how it affects our practice, how it's connected to other things. I was just kind of spitballing.
Okay. Well, no, I think that's a good idea. I mean, sometimes I think about, like, oh, what are we going to talk about this week, Yeah. But yeah, I mean, sure, we could talk about personal consciousness. I assume you just mean individual conscious. Is that what you're referring to as personal consciousness?
Yeah, sort of like comparing the consciousness of the literal consciousness, the thinking of one person to their environment, and how that's different. If that sounds interesting, if you have thoughts on that, I mean, that's something out of my world. We think about that all the time because we're constantly melting into other stuff. And then the trick is, how do you get back to yourself, or whatever's left of you? So if you think there's some meat there, we can talk about that. Otherwise, we could spitball and come up with something else. We could talk about I was just thinking like lines of descent or the evolution of traditions, if that seems like a more interesting topic that you've got more stuff on.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess we could spend some time on individual consciousness. I mean, I think it's going to kind of, I don't know how far we could take it, but we could definitely explore that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And it looks like we had a question from Electric Star Pineapple about how has anyone ever done an evocation?
Yeah, and obviously that's the kind of thing I do a lot, both in my personal practices and I've done it in security work where you bring something into the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's times where the best way to solve a problem is just pull down the bear and let it roar, and then everybody sits down and it plays nice.
Mm-hmm. So what? Yeah. So what's like? What would be the difference between an evocation, an invocation, and a conjuration, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, see, now I see people using the terms in back and forth in reverse order, and some of them, I think, do it on purpose just to be annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the bulk of the people who seem to have a good academic background in occultism seem to, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, because you know the terms of traditional Western occultism better, but the ones who seem to have the academic background seem to treat evocation as bringing the spirit of something into the room, of bringing that ethos into the environment. But they're not wearing it. It's not part of them. Whereas invocation, and this is the way I see these terms, by the way, but whereas invocation is where you bring the spirit into yourself and you're walking around with it for the duration. And it's embedded itself in you, which is what we do a lot of in shamanism. So to me, that's those two terms. Conjuration.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so sorry. I misspoke. I meant convocation.
Convocation.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That word you'll just have to explain to me, because to me that sounds like a bunch of people getting together in a room.
Convocation.
So maybe you can explain that part to me and how you use that, because you know ceremonial magic a lot better than I do. I mean, I've read a few books and known a lot of people, but I haven't studied it as rigorously.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've actually come across the term convocation in ceremonial magic, so I actually have to look it up. But a convocation apparently is a large formal assembly of people. The action of calling people together for a large formal assembly.
Okay, then that's a social thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's.
But it's interesting they use that term in ceremonial magic.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're referring to the combining of powers. The combining of wills of different practitioners, because that would make sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what context I saw it in, because I'll be honest. I mean, I've read about ceremonial magic, but I'm not really. It doesn't really turn me on. I'm not really excited about it.
Oh, okay. Well, I think of Wicca as ceremonial magic. This is what happens when you get somebody from so far outside,
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, it's interesting, because I would agree with you. I think it is. I think it's, I mean, I did a video on this where you take, let's say, kind of rural sort of witchcraft traditions or folk traditions, and then you mix them with ceremonial magic. I think that's where you get Wicca, and I think
I agree with that. I think that's what they did. They basically blended elements of Indian mysticism and Kabbalah and traditional witchcraft of Western Europe, and they made it's kind of a admixture of them all.
Yes. Yeah, and Kemetic was actually, she had mentioned ceremonial magic is really Christian. And yes, it is. But I think that, the farther back you look at the evolution of ceremony, because like everything, even ceremonial magic has had its evolution, you find that a lot of the terms that they were using were very Christian. But one of the reasons why they did that was to protect themselves.
Oh yeah,
Because
yeah.
this
Swap some
is
words out.
well, between the 13th and 17th century, everybody's running around looking for witches.
Mm-hmm.
You're a witch, she's a witch, they're a witch, he's a witch, everywhere a witch. What are we going to do with these witches? You
Yeah.
know, and so one of the things that you did was, first of all, you created your own alchemical language to sort of kind of write your books, so that other people, maybe who were your people delivering materials, or people who actually worked with you, or who were your serfs under you, didn't like raise alarms with the local magistrate, or maybe thought you were a witch, period. So you used a lot of Christian words and Christian symbolism and all this other stuff in there to sort of, quote unquote, sanitize it. So yeah, I agree that it's Christian based, but it's definitely against Christian doctrine. you know?
Yeah. Is how close to the line do you have to stay? And I think it's very different when you go from talking about it where someone might overhear it to what you're actually doing in your lab.
Mm-hmm.
But
Exactly. Yeah.
but every religious ceremony is a ceremonial magic. It's ancestral veneration, it's social organization,
Mm-hmm.
it's controlling the will of the people. So I mean, to me, I use the word
How
ceremonial.
is it controlling the will of the people?
Well, you get everybody together, go through what amounts to a hypnosis ceremony of stand, sit, kneel, sing, and then somebody gives a message to the people, and that's the message to the people for that whatever time period, week or month or year. It's
How is it okay? But how is it hypnosis?
um, the, there was actually a paper done on this years ago, but if you look at religious ceremonies, they follow a pattern very similar to um, a hypnotic or a hypnagogic um, mindset, to put people into a state of receptivity, of partly just being willing to sit there for the whole time. But this has actually been done as science, as secular science. They found that the patterns that were used in religious ceremonies were the same patterns you would use to create mass hypnosis. There's papers coming out of the 1980s, I think. So if you get people used to all doing the same thing at the same time in the same pattern, it's the equivalent of the snapping fingers or the pendulum watch of the hypnotist. And people get used to that pattern, and then when you put them in that state, then they feel more connected to each other and they are more receptive to leadership. And the people,
I really would have to look at that paper. I completely disagree with that. I don't think that that's possible. Hypnosis itself is, first of all, it's very it's highly suspect. There's very few people in the world who can actually be hypnotized, and there's a lot of bad research into that. I think that you can get into a sort of group mind mentality,
oh, that's the same
and
thing.
you can feel a part of a group, and uh, you can get lost in a group. But once you leave that group, or you leave that situation, your personality changes. But I wouldn't call it hypnosis, because that's basically, for example, let's say group mentality. You get into this sort of group mentality where you become completely anonymous. You can suddenly sort of do things that you're not going to be sort of held responsible for, whereas you would be held responsible for it. And so you're more willing to do stuff that you probably would not do if you were by yourself, and in a calm society, or in a calm group. So I don't know about that. I don't know about that animist. I'm not too sure I'm ready to buy that.
It's kind of a related state of mind. We're kind of getting into consciousness anyway. Because if you spend an hour a week in that kind of bonding situation and accepting, or 2 hours a week, whatever, and accepting a message from the same source, then over a period of time, that is going to affect your your intuitive process. I think
Message, sure. Message from what source?
the priest, the political leader, whatever. You know, if you're getting together, if you get people getting together on a regular basis and putting them in that group mind think, some of what goes on there carries forward into their life. And then when they start responding in society, and we're talking about as a society responding to common events, right? They're going to respond in a way that is consistent with the group mind that they're used to going into. I mean, that's just,
okay.
To some extent, that's just the definition of culture.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. What does this relate to? How did we get to this point?
Oh, we were talking about ceremonial magic,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just saying, you know, to some extent, any religious ceremony is a form of ceremonial magic because you're setting up a mindset, you are collecting the willpower of various people, you know, or collecting the attention, and then you're using that to direct what happens in the future. Like indoctrination, is it Sophia? Shakti said, yeah, it's like indoctrination in a way, but it's something that is shared by an entire community by agreement.
Okay, so all right, hold on 1 second. You can perform ceremonial magic by yourself. So how is that going to influence a group?
It's just a different level of it. You know, when you're doing, I'm just saying that an entire group can engage in a form of ceremonial magic, and basically they're casting the magic on themselves. They're casting unity on themselves. Yeah, if everybody reads the same book and take Riptide 182 just mentioned the Bible. You know, if everybody in a society is reading the same book and taking their moral guidance from that, that's culture, but that's also a form of magic, just by getting everyone to share that same source.
So everybody who goes to church is susceptible to this?
Well, every group that gathers, to some extent.
Okay, let's use an example. So everybody who goes to a church?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
They're sharing their group mind together.
Okay, so they go into a church and they read their hymns and they listen to the preacher and they're susceptible to this group mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then they go back and do their normal daily life.
So what changes between the point when they enter the church, before they enter the church, when they're in the church, and then when they're out of the church? What is different between those three stages?
It might be better expressed in terms of guided meditation. Maybe the terms would be a little easier to feel about if you're talking about a group going through a guided meditation together.
Yeah, but you don't go into a church through a guided meditation.
No, but while you're in there, you're all doing the simultaneous events on the same topic at the same time and feeling that kinship. And that's a kind of magic. That's what I'm saying, is that is a kind of group magic. The same way when you do a ceremony together as a cabal or whatever, you are joining in that kind of magic. When
you're joining together as a cabal?
Right. When you get together to do a ceremony, right? Everybody is contributing their energy to the ceremony, right?
Well, I don't know. I actually don't. I don't see that. I mean, I don't see this. I don't understand. Okay, I can see that if you are in a group, you are all contributing to something. I can definitely see that, but I don't see any shift in. I definitely don't see a shift in consciousness. Per se. I also don't see hypnosis, and I just don't see that. I don't see that magical change happening within a group of people to the point that it would reach some kind of a level of hypnosis. I just don't see that.
You haven't been to a lot of big church services, have you?
What is a big church service?
You get a couple 300 people in a room.
I don't think I've ever been to a church with over 300. Maybe one time I was at a church with over 300 people, but it was very close to over 300 people, like maybe 350 or 325.
Okay. Yeah. So you just haven't, I think if you were to go visit some high masses or some Pentecostal churches and use your magical perceptions to sense the changes in the group mind, I think it would make sense to you, but to describe it academically wouldn't be of any use. People definitely get into an altered state of consciousness from these group events. You just may not have experienced them, and you're probably better off. But me trying to describe it intellectually isn't going to give you the perception of it. So that's just something you've been spared in a way. I mean, it's not like it's evil, but it does give you a more fluid sense of what a person is, because people definitely become something a little different when they attend these ceremonies, especially on a regular basis.
Okay, you keep saying these ceremonies. Are you talking about a church?
A religious service, yeah.
Okay. So a church gathering, not a religious service, a church gathering.
No, like the regular sort of Sunday thing, Sunday and Wednesday night, and the more
okay.
So
let's say somebody's at a Billy Graham concert there, and there's like 5, 6, thousands of people there. Let's say. So there's a shift in consciousness and some type of hypnosis that happens during this.
Yeah. Okay. Or the personal consciousness becomes more linked together with the collective consciousness.
Okay.
Well, you've been to rock concerts.
I've been to rock concerts, yeah.
Yeah, when everyone's all passionate about the song and the music, and all of a sudden it's like, or not all of a sudden, but over the course of the concert, everyone kind of gets worked up into the story. They get caught up in the story. I'm speaking about it on a very generic level like that. You get caught up in the songs, and everybody's feeling the same.
I see a commonality between individuals in a group setting, but it's not a loss of consciousness. It's not a hypnotic effect. It's sharing an experience with, however many people are at that concert, like 1,000 people or 300 people or whatever. But the individual person, each individual in that group is still an individual. They're just sharing an experience.
Yeah. Okay. Then I think we just, the terms are stumbling over each other, but that has a profound effect on what they take away from that, right? Wow, I was at Woodstock or whatever, and that affects their future self-experience and their future social relations or how they view their world. I mean, these are profound experiences that alter the way a person continues down their path.
Alters them in what way, though?
Well, it depends on whatever specific situation was happening. I'm talking about a very generic thing.
I think I don't know. I think I understand what you're saying. I just don't agree with some of the terms that you use. Like hypnosis. I don't think people are hypnotized when they go to concerts, and when you're in a group situation, even in ceremonial magic, you're not hypnotized. And when you're witnessing a ceremony, you're not hypnotized. I think that you share an experience, and that is what happens in a group setting is you are sharing an experience with other people, and you're living an experience. But as for each individual, they are still each individually, their own person, their own agency, their own consciousness. They're still subject to that personal consciousness, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, it's not like bees. It doesn't go as far as like bees who are part of a hive mind. Absolutely.
Well, because you had mentioned hypnosis. So
yeah, well, don't get caught up on that word too much, because I may have a more general idea of what hypnosis is than what you have. It's
Well, yeah,
some of this,
I did get caught up in that word because it's,
it's not always, the guy with the watch fob going back and forth, that's just one way to get into a state of social confabulation. Does that phrase make any sense? Where you're sharing a story. And one of the problems with hypnosis is it's really easy for the hypnotist to get the subject of the hypnosis to say all kinds of crazy stuff just because they're trying to have a sympathetic interaction. My father happens to have been a former president of a major hypnotherapist organization, so my view on these kind of that plus my background gives me a slightly different view maybe than what most people would have of what amounts to hypnotism or hypnosis.
Okay. Well, all right. So let's
not trip over that word.
Well, yeah. Okay. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm highly suspect of this is because one of the things that I do on my channel is, they say that, there's these groups out there doing these mass spells of hypnosis on people, and it's like, no, they're not,
they're not.
And so it's one of the things that I have to defend. So if you're going to start saying that, I really want to know, I really want to question you on it, and find out exactly what it is. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of reasons why I would want to say, to make sure that this is either accurate or not accurate. Because if this is true, that some kind of mass spells are going on and by the Illuminati or witches or whatever, then, and people believe this, then it's like, okay, what is the fucking point? If these idiots are actually going to believe this,
Yeah, that's just not how hypnosis works.
Well, okay.
You're right. You are absolutely right. Those kind of spells are bullshit. You can't hypnotize an entire country with magic that way. Hypnosis is something, it's a relationship between people who are agreeing to have a relationship. Yeah. So it's a social group. It's internal to a group that has agreed to enter into that mindset.
Yeah.
In fact, if you see a hypnotist if you ever see a stage hypnotist show, typically they're pretty good at cold reading a crowd. So they'll pull a dozen people out of the crowd and they'll start doing the thing and trying to get people into the hypnotic state. And at certain stages early in the show, someone's not responding. Someone's not joining the state, and they'll just kind of quietly go, "Oh, you can go sit down. It's not for you. Oh, you can go sit down. It's not for you." And they'll kind of pare down the group to the ones who are the most sympathetic to that state of mind. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you're right. There's only not everyone can be hypnotized, and people have various degrees of willingness to go into that state. But the more people there are trying, the better it works for everybody. But yeah, if you've got a dozen people in Colorado trying to hypnotize the entire United States, they're just kidding themselves. That's just not how it works. That's not what hypnosis is.
Yeah. So, okay.
That's delusional.
Okay. So anyhow, personal consciousness. So because we only got about 17 minutes. So, yeah. So what were you thinking about personal consciousness?
I think we don't have enough time left to go into that because that's another kind of box, or that's another kind of bag of tricks that for me to even describe it might take longer. If I was
that's all right. We can go over. I don't think we're going to run out of time talking about personal consciousness.
Okay. Well, and it kind of follows from what we've been talking about. For my realm of practice, we see consciousness as existing at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I've described this a little before. You have, in reality, in nature, there is the sort of molecular level or atomic level, and then there's the cellular level, and then there's the level of an individual creature. And then some funky stuff happens because you then have consciousness at the level of species. And then, but you also have at a parallel level of consciousness at the level of the ecosystem full of very many species. And then from there, it gets cosmic. But so for me, personal consciousness is a bridge between by personal consciousness, I mean the consciousness of an individual creature, a tree, a human, a dog. That's a bridge that sort of connects the cellular level to the species or the environmental level. And so it's a little fractal like, you know, you kind of zoom in real far and it's like, oh, there's still fractal going on, or you pull out real far and you can see the whole fractal and it's going on. And so the personal consciousness is a sort of middle layer. And the cool thing about that is that with some practice and some sensitivity, you know, or practiced sensitivity, you can take your personal consciousness and move it down a layer, up a layer. You can do some biofeedback with your own health, and you can also perceive things coming out of the environment, or you can perceive, instead of just a dog, you can perceive dogginess in general. And so for me, personal consciousness is that part which is helping your cells organize and helping their, you know, your body systems work together, and it's allowing you to have thoughts as an individual, but that also allows you to form a bridge between other people and levels above and below you. Mm-hmm. So that's the shortest, most generic version of personal consciousness. I think I can concentrate.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. There you go. There you have it. That's personal consciousness. Okay, cool.
Does that work for you as a working definition? Does that make sense?
Well, personal, well, I mean, it's subjective, you know. Personal consciousness to me is just my individual consciousness. That's it. I don't have to get any more detailed than that, you know. Yeah, each individual has their own personal consciousness.
Okay. Yeah, see, I think maybe your realm of magic doesn't depend as much on the sliding scale thing. Whereas when you get into my realm of magic, we're all about the sliding scale everywhere. And that's kind of our bread and butter. And you can get the same effects from either technique, but as long as the term makes some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I mean, I mean, but again, like I said, I mean, it's subjective. I mean, I don't buy into this concept that there's all these various different forms of magic out there. I don't believe that. I think there's one form of magic that all people tap into, because I think that it's in a sense, it's a natural force. It is part of it's a natural energy. It's not supernatural. It's not it's not so people talk about their forms of magic like it's different from what everyone else is, and it's all the same, in my opinion. It's just that people access it through various different means, and you can access it using any number of different ways, but you're still accessing the same thing. So when you say your type of magic, I'm just assuming that what you're talking about is the way that you access it.
Yeah, exactly. You've got that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But, you know, when it's kind of like, you know, once you use a certain technique to achieve the result over and over, you get used to the way that particular technique works and the mechanisms that make it work. Whereas if you use a different technique or a different artistic way of approaching it, you know, and depending on, you know, and the other thing is there's different purposes. And so some techniques work better for certain purposes. And as a result, you end up with kind of a little bit different perspectives on how to go about achieving a result.
Well, could you give an example?
Oh boy. Okay, so let's say like a couple of weeks ago, you asked me something that kind of stumped me because I totally didn't expect it. And you said, well, in your practice, what would you do if you wanted to do like a money spell or to get a job spell? And the entire question kind of like was alien to me because I don't do spells for that purpose generally. Because that's just not the way I use magic to achieve objectives. It's like, you know, the other side of the coin. Are you trying to manufacture an opportunity, or are you trying to put yourself in a place where the opportunity will come to you? It's a little bit yin and yang. But as a result, you start seeing things from the perspective of how the technique works. You know, do you change the room or do you change yourself? So far, it is a lot like auto hypnosis. It's called trance work. It's what we do a lot of in animism and shamanism. Is you bend yourself into a shape that the universe will fit to give you information. The question is, are you trying to change the world or change yourself? I mean, that's kind of the whole black-white magic thing, which is not the way most people use the terms black-white magic, but it's how Donald Michael Craig used it. Is, some magic is meant to change the world. You weed your garden, you make a hammer. Some magic is meant to change who you are so that you are better at doing what you do. And so depending on which side of that, you're concentrating your practice on. Gnosticism was very white magic. You change yourself and you receive a perception. And so the difference in the technique or the difference in the intent plays out in how you then see these things flowing around you, because you're just wearing a different, you're wearing a different set of goggles.
Okay.
It's like I would never smudge sage around my house
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
But some people, do a lot of that.
Oh, I know, because it's what everybody else does, so they do it.
Well, and for some people, that's their practice is based on having a clear space that nothing is interfering with, and so they kind of need that in order to have that sense of clarity. Whereas, like in my practice, if I'm looking around, whatever spirits or spiritual influences are flowing through the house are just telling me what I've got going on that's allowing those things to come in the house. And it means if I've got something in the house that really I don't want here, or that isn't having a positive effect, then I change something about myself. There's other ways to deal with it. There's nastier ways to deal with unwelcome spirits, but if I change the house, and that changes who wants to come here. Yeah. So it's a little bit Taoist, but I do have kind of a Taoist-y kind of background.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean, I especially on YouTube, I find that people fall in line with other people. So like there'll be I call it like the video of the week, you go into a cafe and there's like the soup of the week, and that's kind of like how YouTube is. People have these various things, and so you'll see like a lot of people doing the same videos on that particular thing, and then a lot of people talk about saging. It's like, oh, you've got to sage, and it's like, I have never fucking saged in my entire life. I've been saged, but I have never done it because I have no reason to. You know what I mean? I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that you just don't assume that everybody runs around saging.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, because they have set up a technique that is dependent on this sort of still water. Yeah. They create the still water in their workspace in their home, and they want to work everything from still water. And they tend to be people who tend to be very precise about what they're trying to achieve. Whereas other people are happy bobbing around on the waves, and we're just sort of navigating generally. And the kind of people who deal with storms tend to be more of the bobbing around on the waves type, because after a while, the storm teaches you to deal with bobbing around on the waves. Whereas if you're dealing with a basin of water in your personal workspace that's not going to have any ripples, you don't have to deal with bobbing around. You're always working with a smooth mirror. And so that's part of why you have these different traditions or perspectives on, what's important.
You still there?
I'm still there.
Oh, okay. You went out. You cut out for a second there.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, it's just so funny. I just find that these, People just sort of get caught up in these various things, and everybody ends up doing it.
Well, and you know what? And, just in general, this is something I was actually thinking of earlier, because it does kind of feed back. My attitude towards that does feed back to my little 4-circle diagram. In a way, that's a representation of the way reality interacts with itself. But you can also take like all these different magical traditions or magical realms or different ways of doing magic, and you could put them in those little regions on that diagram and say, well, this person's practice tends to be a mixture of, you know, this circle and this circle, but not this other one very much. You know, hopefully they're not too isolated. You know, someone who's just sitting there doing mathematics is doing a very refined kind of magic, the pure symbol manipulation, and they don't care if it affects anything.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, someone like me is trying to be very close to the middle and having a lot of overlapping influences. You know, so I'm in one of these little triangles around the center, maybe. You know, I'm definitely still got some bias, but I'm trying to incorporate a lot of different elements of experience. And so you can actually, and I've done this with like fantasy RPG games, you can actually say, oh, well, the sorcerers are this region, the witches are this region, the paladins are this region, you know, and it's one of these, you know, or the clerics or, you know, the warriors. And you can kind of say, oh, well, that person's practice is mostly an overlapping of these kind of elements. And so they're somewhere on that diagram.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you get an awful lot of different perspectives from people on the same subject or the ways to achieve the same effects, because they're used to working with a certain mixture of those circles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just distracted by the chat.
Oh yeah, they're doing great. I love the chat. Everybody.
Sophia Shakti was mentioning that it's all just they're talking, or she's talking about change, like the change within oneself, and then the outer change, the change outside of the world. And I mean, just to give my perspective on that, I mean, I see that as both things. I think that first of all, you want to internally change. You want to be able to change yourself and change your consciousness and evolve. And I mean, I think that that's one of my primary goals, you know, is to sort of always be changing and allow myself to change, because I think that that's an important aspect of my personal growth. But as for changing the world, yes, I've felt the effects. I've experienced the effects of changing the world. And unfortunately, I could only follow each thing that has happened. I can only follow it to a certain point. And then after that, it's out. I can't explain it anymore. You know, like if I do a spell to get $50 and I get $50, it's not like $50 poof came into existence. Well, actually one time it did, but for the most part, most of the time it comes about through other ways, like, oh, like somebody ended up giving you a $50 bonus or something. It usually happens that way. Yeah, I'm joking because this one time I was with my friends and I was like, we wanted to get some money for something. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if we suddenly just, and then right when I was thinking that, there was a $5 bill that was on the ground. So that was like, it just sort of popped into existence, but not really. It probably came there because somebody dropped it or something. I mean, there's a whole reason why things happen. Nothing actually pops into existence.
Yeah, well, as long as you stay away from physics. There's some weird.
I mean, right. But I mean, nothing's going to pop into existence. Everything has an explanation. Like if you win a lawsuit or you win something, there's a reason why. If you did a spell for it and it came true, there's a reason why it happened. It didn't just happen.
Yeah, it works. It's usually and supposed to work itself into the fabric of reality. It gets woven into your fate.
Yeah,
it's very Norse, but but that's kind of the way that makes the most sense. Is a lot of that kind of magic is weaving magic. You're weaving reality into a shape where it's going to put something in your part, put something at your feet. It's going to join some thread to your thread. And I think that's the best explanation for magic in general. Although sometimes reality just has little hiccups and weird, truly bizarre shit happens, but that's not something you count on, and it's not something you should be trying to create happening all the time. Because
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I've had many experiences which are just, I mean, there's no description for them. It's just amazing. You know what I mean? It's just amazing. And it happens. And, but it's not outside of, I mean, like if I was with somebody, like let's say who was, cold, hard logic, and something amazing happened, they'd be, oh, well, yeah, but that was just a fluke, or that was just this or that.
they explain
You
it
can actually reason everything away. So it's
Mhm.
not like it was, beyond, it wasn't something that was outside of the realm of possibility. It was definitely within the realm of possibility. It just happened to be an amazing coincidence. I guess is the best way to describe it.
Well, yeah, and that and that's why some of us sort of understand and practice these arts, and some people just don't because they can't. And they also try to stay away from quantum mechanics because when they get out into that realm, that's why I mentioned physics. Is we get out into the realm of quantum mechanics, all kinds of crazy stuff starts happening, and that whole 19th century Victorian era mechanism breaks down. And it breaks down at a macroscopic level sometimes. But that's not something you should be trying to impose on your environment.
Right. Now that brings up an interesting point, and we can actually go over a little bit because I'd like to get your feedback on this. Do you think that anybody can work magic, or only certain people can do it? And if so, do you think they're, quote unquote, people will call them like, lineage or bloodlines, like family traditions, or, do you think that certain people or certain family lines are more inclined to magical work? Do you understand that question?
Oh yeah, I totally
Okay.
understand the question because I come from family heritage of practicing various kinds of things. And hang on just a second, I'm gonna clear my throat. Mute. Okay, now there are whole tribes that are more magical than other tribes because they've developed that in themselves over many generations.
Mhm.
I don't know if you could quite go as far as like the B'nai Gesserit from Frank Herbert's Dune and breed the mighty prophet, deliberately genetically. But there are definitely certain talents that pass down through families. I've just seen too many cases. And sometimes, just like any other trait, and I'm not saying it's genetic, I'm just saying that there are certain things that are more along the lines of a spirit or a talent that is magically manifest in a lineage and seems to stick with it. Seen quite a bit of that. And even when families cease to practice like spiritualism, people will pop up in that family who just have it in spades. They've just got the big dose of it. And so it's like it never totally goes away. And on the other hand, some people are just bricks. If you're going to see, can everybody do magic? Not really. Some people just are just bricks. They don't have the talent, just like any other talent. Talent for writing, talent for speaking, talent for math, talent for mechanical devices. I mean, some people should never open the hood of their car because they just do not have the mechanic gene. And anything they do under the hood of their car is going to just screw it up even worse. As a result, these people need to hire mechanics. So I see magical talent as something that's about like any other talent that passes down through the generations. Some tribes, breed for it with initiation rituals. If you can't pass this initiation ritual, I mean, there are some deadly initiation rituals in the history of cultures. If you don't have enough magic to do this ritual, you're going to die. And as a result, everybody in the tribe has enough magic to do that ritual in whatever form, shape, or technique of magic they use for the test. Whether it's wilderness survival or, being able to enter some state of mind and come up with some personal revelation. I mean, it can be selected for, it can be negatively selected for.
Mm-hmm.
If the people who can't pass the test don't get to pass on their genes, then you kind of refine that talent within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Polynesians, the Polynesians selected for the ability to navigate, to sense the landscape and the patterns of the waves, and they became awesome navigators long before anyone else was.
Okay.
So that's how I feel about that.
Oh, okay. All right. So, well, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear that. I sort of agree with you, and because I think that there are people who are just naturally gifted. They just can. They sort of get into it easier than other people. But I think everybody can do it if they just try. But they might not be as good as somebody who's maybe a natural at it, and you know, like they practice a little bit and they just seem to do really well at it. You know, but for the most part, I think almost anyone can. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who are just like you had mentioned, like bricks, like they just can't. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are people and they probably won't even try. Like I know there's a family member of mine who doesn't believe in it at all, but they're natural. They're completely natural magicians, and but they don't even realize it. And you just see them opening up doors throughout their life, all these various ways, and it's just they just do it, you know.
They're just
But
not trying to develop it or use it. It's just happening anyway.
yeah, it's just happening, even though they haven't really developed it. And but I also don't believe that it goes along bloodlines. I just that part I don't believe. But I've also don't really have any reason to believe it, you know.
I've known,
Maybe, huh?
I've known a number of multi-generational spiritualist families,
Hmm.
and you know, and then look at the Romani,
The Romani, what?
the Gypsies. These people have clearly got stuff passing down through their family lines that makes them it makes it obnoxiously easy for their descendants to develop arts like divination and perceptions. I mean, they're a very good example of what I would call, you know, they're like the ultimate example of bloodline magic to me,
Hmm.
because
Okay.
you know their children put, you know, they just talk around the table a little bit. I think Lady Ambrosia was talking about, oh, this was table talk in my house, you know, and she's having perceptions and developing magic with very little effort because it's part of her culture to have it. And so I think to some extent it's because you get early exposure, but also, you know, I've known a lot of Romani over the years, and they were all magical people. None of them were
So
bricks, you know.
is it okay? So is that something that is if you hang around people who practice magic, you think that it rubs off on you?
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
It will definitely change your worldview. You know, I've had the rather fun experience of especially there was a time, particularly in the '90s and the O's, mostly in the '90s, where I was hanging around with a lot of other magical people, including a couple other shamans. And we also had some friends who were very materialistic, non-magical thinking atheists, like mechanistic 19th century style. And they were having experiences that didn't make them magical, but it made them completely reevaluate their worldview.
Hmm.
Because, you know, at some point when the fairy princess just walks through the middle of the living room and everybody goes, was that, you know, and they're going, I can't believe I just saw that. I didn't want to see that. Why do I hang out with you guys? You know,
Yeah.
it didn't make them a magician, but it did change their worldview. But I think being raised in a magical environment, just like any other environment you're raised in, is going to accentuate the talent that you have. You know, just like kids who grow up with, you know, parents who help them with their homework do better in school.
Hmm.
People who grow up in an athletic family are going to make the best of their athleticism. So that, you know, that's just a nature versus nurture thing. And sometimes one overrides the other.
Hmm.
You know, and that's, you know, that's just the nature of development. But then you do definitely have these sort of savants who, whether they want to or not, you know, they're seeing calculus equations in their sleep, or they're doing natural spell work even though they don't know they are, because
Right.
they're savants. I think
Right.
that's
Well, yeah, because I mean that's kind of how I perceive it. I perceive it like, say, playing a musical instrument or art. It's kind of like, to some people they really take to it naturally. And then there's some skills that are passed along, like, let's say, Italian marble cutters, stonemasons, or boat people, who make boats. They pass along generation to generation of how to do a particular thing, but that's a skill, and so they grow up with this skill, and then they use the skill and they hone the skill.
yeah,
um,
and I think
so hold on one second, I'm not done. So there's those two things. There's the skill that one can develop and nurture, and then there's the affinity for it that people can develop. And I think that if the skill and the affinity come together, I think that that's really fantastic. You know.
yeah, and I think part of what you see with some of these sort of magical bloodline things going on, or the appearance of them, is that, let's say each family in each generation they have three kids.
Mm-hmm.
And let's use your shipbuilder, like a carpenter kind of thing, or a stone cutter. Let's say that in each generation you've got a family business that's gone on for generations. The kid that sucks at it and just doesn't have the talent as much as the other kids doesn't take over the family business. They go off and do something else. They sell fish. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
the ones who have more of that talent then continue the tradition, and they're the ones that take over the family business, and they spend more time around other stone cutters and end up married to this child of another stone cutter, so to speak. And so there's an evolution of the talent among the people who have it the strongest, and the ones who don't kind of go off and do whatever else they do with their life.
Yeah, right. But in the example that I was using, I was saying that there's a skill that is passed along. Like, you use this skill over and over and over again, and you're shown techniques for the skill. And somebody who just walks in, they would have to relearn, years and years and years and years of what this person basically is come just to get to this point where this person is now. That's a skill that you can develop. But then there's an affinity that one might have for a particular thing, like art or music. And so that I was making a distinction between those two things. I think that anybody can develop skill. It just takes time. Somebody who has an affinity for something, they don't need it. They just have an affinity for it. So, they don't really need to practice for years and years and years.
Yeah, no, I agree with that dynamic. However, the same person, no matter who they are, after 40 years of practice, they're definitely better than they were 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that too. I mean, that's kind of a linear development thing. So yeah, you kind of get your base statistics. I don't know if you've done role playing, but you get your base statistics in D&D. Oh, I got an 18 strength to start with, but then you build up your skill with sword. And no matter what, when you're 20 levels higher, when you're the old man, the old man's always going to be better than the young man was. And so yeah, it's both things work together. And some people, they get an experience point multiplier or whatever. They get to learn twice as fast. And so at the same age, maybe at they're 25, they're better than the 35-year-olds, but they're probably still not better than the 65-year-olds,
Yeah.
unless you're Mozart, unless you're, a savant. Then all bets are off with savants.
Yeah, really.
Because sometimes nature decides to interfere.
Yeah.
And just says, let's put all of that talent into this person and see what they do with it. Let's see what happens when you make someone, when you make someone Leonardo da Vinci. What happens?
Yeah, really. Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and that's not your fault, and you can't judge people on that. That's just the fact that nature has a nasty sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's just evolution.
Yeah, basically. But I think all of those factors play into people's magical work.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just think of all the different skills in magic. You got your divination, you got your herbalism, you got your nature communions and all that stuff. Even within the various practices of magical workings, you're going to have people who have more of a talent and therefore get more positive reinforcement from it. and as a result become much, much better at that one particular thing. And then that kind of becomes their hammer, and all they see is nails sometimes.
Right.
Which is, I can deal with everything with summoning. So I'm going to summon for everything, because they happen to be really good at it. And that's why we work on, as part of why I have the user graphic that I have, is to remind me not to become, too much of the idiot savant, and partly to keep looking for those blind spots so you can be more well-rounded.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, it was good because that was a question that just kind of came to my mind as we were talking about this. So it was good to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think we pretty much agree on that.
Yeah. Well, let's see. It's 7:15 already.
Yeah.
We kind of bounced around a little bit, but it was interesting. We got a chance to talk about personal consciousness.
Yeah, well, all about personal aptitude and identity, man. I think we're getting better at this.
Yeah, and we'll have to figure out a topic for next week.
Did you ever, just curious, did you ever get a chance to watch that Martha Beck video? I know it's kind of a long one.
Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. No, I didn't, because I've just been so caught up with all the stuff that's been going on, and then I ended up watching like all these videos on Charlottesville to try and get perspective on stuff, and then I got caught up in videos. So I have like all these videos that I have been working on, and I really need to just focus in on them and actually start putting them out.
You've got your work to do, so I appreciate that. I just was wondering if you had seen it, because
no, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to see it.
If you ever get the chance to watch that, because putting out your content is the main point of all this.
Yeah.
This other stuff is just comparing notes.
Well, I mean, it's still good to get other people's perspectives. I mean, I don't want to completely close myself off to stuff, because I still want to keep myself open.
I think there could be an interesting conversation to be had there, but
I'd have to watch it first.
Yeah. So if that ever happens, I think I would love to hear your point of view on that, because that's someone she's an academic. Okay. She's a scientist, and she's a scientist who ran around studying native cultures for years.
And I think, did you send that video to me through a personal message?
No, I linked it in one of our previous I linked it in the comment section of one of our previous videos, and since sometimes linked comments don't ever show up for the person, I actually typed it out in our last talk.
Oh, here it is, right? Okay, Martha Beck.
Yeah,
the 4 Technologies of Magic.
Yeah, and actually it's TEDx Talk San Diego, or TEDx San Diego, all one word. Martha Beck, the 4 Technologies of Magic.
All right, I'll see if I can find it now.
It would be interesting to see how you reacted to a scientist who has explored sort of my angle a little bit. I mean, what she's doing in this talk is talking to people in the city about human potential. She's not talking about shamanism, but she does use shamans as an example of an unusual form of consciousness.
And it's a TEDx talk?
Yeah, it's TEDx San Diego, all one word.
And then San Diego, Martha Beck, the 4 Technologies of Magic. This one's about 18 minutes and 20 seconds. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And the reason I like it is because she does a pretty good job of what she calls cobbling together commonalities and different natural practices. And the talk itself is very funny, because she has given herself some very extreme experiences in her career studying Native people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right. She's one of those ones who globetrotted around, tracking with African natives and going in canoes with Polynesians and stuff like that.
Yes. Okay.
And so she makes a good story of it, and so that's why I've sort of linked that to people as an introductory thing.
Okay, I will. I'll check that out. Maybe we can talk about it next week. Yeah. All right, I'm going to end this. So thank you so much, Animus. It was wonderful talking with you.
Man. It's we always have some kind of fun doing this stuff.
Yes, exactly. And thank you all. Sorry we didn't get to a couple of your questions. But I apologize. Maybe next time we'll be able to get to them. But thanks everybody for showing up, and blessed be, and have a good night.
Okay, have fun being you.
All right, thanks. Good night.